What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along.
Welcome to Book Club with Julia, but not Victoria, because this little mini-sode that I'm doing is very much about something that I am currently experiencing in my own academic career that Victoria has not had to deal with in a while. So I'm going to take the reins on this one. So as I've talked about repeatedly on the podcast, I am a current graduate student in anthropology in Belgium. And in January, I sort of went through my very first European master's student exam period where you write thousands of words and, so many pages of essay after essay after essay in a very short span of time. But it really got me thinking about the world of academic writing and also reading all these texts for class as well, and then trying to make decisions about how I write my own papers. I've been really thinking about just how strange academic writing is. How strange it is to read, how strange it is to write, and it's difficult and bizarre, and it's like in its own little world. And then after our discussion about science communication last episode, I thought this would be kind of a fun addition, being kind of in the social sciences, to look at okay, what are these original scientific texts and how do they get made and how do they get written and communicated and all that? So I have brought on my friend Katie to kind of help me parse through this kind of weird world of academic writing and share some of her insight, and so that we can also complain together about our experiences. Katie is my fellow American anthropology master's friend person. She's really here in the trenches with me, and she knows way more about anthropology than I do, and so she'll be like, yeah, that person who did that thing, and I'm like, yep, I definitely know who that is. I'm gonna go Google it right now. She is from Kansas, but she is aware that she is no longer in Kansas anymore. So please don't say that joke to her. Please welcome Katie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Yeah, I have heard the, "Oh, you're not in Kansas anymore" line so many times in so many places.
I feel like that's all Europeans know about Kansas. Is they're like, oh, well, Dorothy is no longer there.
Yeah, we have other cultural exports. Pizza
corn?
Hut.
Pizza Hut? Really?
Pizza Hut. It's from Wichita.
I did not know that.
Yeah. My hometown is Lawrence, Kansas, so closer to the Missouri border.
And you know some of the Queer Eye people.
I do, from the Kansas City
series.
Yeah, because they did one in my hometown. Mm-hmm. The woman who worked at the Mad Greek. So I know. So I did not know the person who was transformed. I did not know the subject, but I knew the person who nominated her, and one of the friends that goes to the party at the end to show off the progress. Yeah, and there were a lot of news articles in my town about sightings, like, oh, they found Jonathan Van Ness at the McDonald's. Famous fictional person is the brothers from Supernatural.
Oh, yes.
From my hometown.
Because your town is haunted because of all the people who were killed during the Civil War.
A lot of people were killed quite brutally during the Civil War, and that the town was also burnt down. It's better now. We've rebuilt. Yeah, that's Kansas.
So we are both here because we're getting a master's in anthropology, largely because it's cheap.
Yes.
But you do have more of a history with anthropology. So what brought you to this place here, getting your master's in anthropology in the middle of a pandemic?
Okay, let's roll back to 2013 when I graduated. I was a very indecisive 18-year-old. I am now a very indecisive 27-year-old. But slightly more decisive. I've made some progress, and at the time I didn't know what I wanted to study. I ended up having multiple majors. One of them was anthropology, because in America, anthropology is 4 fields. And the 4 fields are cultural anthropology, which is what Julia and I are studying, linguistic anthropology, physical/biological anthropology, and archaeology. I was a high school student with a wide array of interests. I thought archaeology was cool. I thought linguistics was cool. Cultural anthropology, also appealing. And I was really bad at math. So I knew I wasn't going to go into the sciences. So anthropology was a good fit because it's very science adjacent. That was kind of what led me to it. My uncle is an archaeologist. So I was familiar with the field earlier than most people.
So then how did you get here?
So back in 2019, I decided, 2020 is going to be the year. That's the year I'll go back to school. I had been living in Taiwan for several years prior, teaching English. I got really burnt out working with small children.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a change. 2020 is going to be the year. I had this big plan. My goal was I was going to go to China. Because I have a friend who was living in China, and I was going to visit her, and then I was going to ride the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Europe. Dude. And then the funniest thing happened in January of 2020. I had just been accepted to KU Leuven. I was really excited, got into school, and then, there's something in the news about some new SARS in China. Yeah, and I kept thinking, maybe this will blow over, maybe things will be better. Eventually deferred a year. So, yeah, I went back to the US for the summer. Had a lot of reverse culture shock. With the US having gone through this very traumatic period of time that I just did not experience.
So then we'll get into this more in a second, but how does, first impressions here? We spend a lot of time of you being like, this is not how they do it in America.
Yeah.
In terms of the anthropology approach, in terms of the academic approach. Okay,
so I think that my main issue is I made a big mistake in thinking that Flanders was going to be more like the Netherlands. So I've interacted with a lot of Dutch people in my time living abroad. And for some reason I thought, because Flanders is the Dutch-speaking half of Belgium, I assumed that the university system and the culture in general would be a lot more politically progressive than it actually is. It's very conservative, and you can see that reflected in the university. Also, in the interpretation of anthropology. It's also so influenced by French academia.
It's so French.
The examination system is pretty much exactly the same as what my grandfather described his PhD in France being like. There aren't tests before. There aren't papers before. You get one exam or one paper, and that is your grade for the entire class. And it's very lecture heavy, very one-sided. But specifically talking about anthropology, so I expected it to only be focusing on cultural. I was okay with that. I knew that that's what I'm focusing on. I didn't expect the UK bias and the France bias as well. The focus specifically on academics from the UK and France. So much of our coursework is on philosophy, which I did not
Continental
expect.
Philosophy,
yeah.
too. It's very biased.
Yeah.
It has a very strong leaning. And, you can tell, this is an institution that is hundreds of years old and hasn't shifted that much.
Yeah. The institution is from 1425.
Yep.
Fun fact, women have only been allowed in for the past 100 years.
Oh, good.
And I feel like you can kind of tell.
Yeah.
But, I still enjoy anthropology. I feel like I've still learned a lot, but it wasn't. It was not what I was expecting, and I wasn't expecting to have to teach myself so much, because the professors, I'm sure, are fantastic researchers. There's not much of an emphasis on pedagogy. They just kind of throw whatever they want onto a PowerPoint, if they even do a PowerPoint.
If yeah. We spent one class last week just going through our professor's YouTube algorithm. Just what's going to show up next? And it was a wild 3 hours.
We saw what targeted demographic he was in. And it's a very particular style of instruction as well. They deliver their PowerPoints a lot like a paper
Yeah, so it's been an adjustment for sure. Well, I have told some parts of my story before on this podcast, but Katie hasn't heard it, so I'm going to give a succinct version, and then we're going to get into it. So, I was an English major in undergrad. We all know this. It's part of the premise of this show. Over time, started to realize that I used books in order to teach myself how humans worked. Like, it helped make the connection between someone's internal dialogue and then what their actions looked like. So I could see that there was a difference between, like, someone's internal thought process and then what they actually did. And that's kind of a theme that has appeared throughout anything I've ever done, is that, like, I really wanted to understand people. I studied abroad in London my junior year of college, and after I left, I was like, I have to move back to Europe. And I had this idea in my head of like, well, the easiest way to get a visa is to do your master's degree. Like, students get visas a lot easier in Europe than any other type of person. I was like, okay, so I'll do my master's in Europe at some point in the future, probably like late 20s. But I didn't know what I wanted to study, so I knew I didn't want to go into my master's right away, because I was like, I don't want to just study books again. That's boring. I want to have like a focus. So I started working in publishing first, and I was like, this sucks. I don't want to work here. I worked in the nonprofit space for a while, and I was the only person, because nonprofits is very like humanities driven. Like, there's so few math people in that space. And I was the only person who was like vaguely math or data competent. Like, I ended up finding my niche as like a kind of translator of like helping book people understand data and like translating data for people in a way that they could understand. And I felt very much like a go-between. Data analytics and like constructing tables and stuff like really sparked something in me that I was not expecting. And I was like, I wonder, so maybe I should go into the social sciences. Like, maybe I need something that's like a bit more data heavy, because this is really interesting. So then I kind of went that direction for another year at a different job. And it sucked. And I was like, oh, this is what most of the data world is like. If that's the direction you want to go, into the tech world. It was very depressing. And so while all this was happening, I got my autism diagnosis, and I read this book, which we have covered on the podcast, called Watching the English, which I now can place within a particular like methodology and a particular field and a particular, it's very English in its perspective and there's certain things. I didn't understand that at the time. I was just like, this is a book that explains how English people work. And it like, I could draw connections between like actual human beings in my life and actual experiences that I had had in England. And it felt like super insightful and super useful. You know, it was probably overgeneralizing, but it was so big. It was such a big text that she got into so many different subcategories of people and had so many different caveats that it felt like it wasn't overgeneralizing, you know? I was like, little light bulb in me, and I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And the autism diagnosis kind of clinched it for me, because I had this moment where I realized all throughout my academic and professional career, all I've been trying to do is to understand things and to help improve communication and understanding between people, either helping someone else understand other people or helping me understand humans who I didn't feel like I was fully a part of. So I literally, in my application to this university, it was very poetic, but it was like, you know, I've been doing anthropology my whole life and I didn't realize it. You know, gathering data, observing and participating in the world that I was in, and then noticing patterns and saying, okay, under these particular set of circumstances, here's what the rules are. And so that's kind of what I was hoping to learn how to do. I wanted someone to teach me how to do that, like, professionally. And instead I show up here and they just talk about philosophy. And I'm like, I mean, I've kind of already done some of this, but like not in this particular context. And like, you're still not teaching me how to do this at all. There's been almost no practical information whatsoever. I'm already a trained writer, so I don't even really need that component of it. Like, I just need to know how to be a social scientist. And there is no education on that whatsoever. I'm kind of learning as I go, kind of making it up in a way of like, okay, well, what kind of social scientist do I want to be? Because if they'll accept these certain types of writing from me, then what other boundaries can I push? Like, so I feel like I kind of have nothing to lose, you know? I don't want to get my PhD. I don't want this to be my career. I want it to be useful for me and potentially useful for anyone else that I like, whatever I end up doing next. I want it to be useful for that and helping people understand each other better. So that's kind of why we're here. And Katie and I just finished exams a couple weeks ago. And so I thought we could complain.
Oh, yeah. I have a lot of feelings.
Academic writing is the most bizarre little microcosm of language. 'Cause, like, you're speaking English, but you're not. You're really not. And I actually learned recently, reading this one book, they talked about how during the Enlightenment originally, academic texts were written in like a conversational style, like similar to like Plato or something. And then the Germans, it's the goddamn Germans, guys. They ruined everything. The German academic philosophers came in and they were the ones who had all this complicated jargon. And then everyone was like trying to impress them or something or some bullshit. I don't know. And copied them. And that academic culture just spread everywhere. And it's, fills me with rage. But yeah, why does academic writing suck, in your opinion?
Where do we begin? Well, I do agree that I feel like you have to learn another language. It feels a lot like learning a second language. But then it's odd because I feel like I'm a native English speaker. I should understand what this article is about. Why am I rereading the same sentence over and over again, trying to make sense of it?
It makes you feel stupid.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome is real. Yeah, because I thought, I should know this stuff. I had to do a lot of background reading. I had to learn what discourse was, because that is used in a lot of ways that I did not.
Because they like, at least our program, they really hit the ground running, like assuming what you already knew.
Yeah.
And there's so many of us who are coming from so many different fields. Like, you can't make that assumption. Like, there's people coming from hard sciences, soft sciences, humanities, and I don't know that many people who have anthropology experience.
And I have anthropology experience, but it's not... I still felt kind of out of my depth, especially with a lot of the texts in intro, because they start with these classical texts that just are not written in a style that's very accessible. Claude Lévi-Strauss, they love him here. Not a great writer. A lot of his ideas are like a little bit wacky. He would be amazing at writing BuzzFeed quizzes. I've thought about this a lot because it's all about separating into, are you from a hot society or a cold society?
He loves random binaries and categories for no reason. Yeah, he would be very good at that. He'd be like, what your favorite pasta says about what society you're from.
What does your favorite type of tree tell you about if the society is a, quote, wife-taking society or wife-giving society?
I feel like academic writing, I mean, it's this whole other world, and it also feels a little gaslighty. Like you were saying, oh, I know English, I should know what they're saying, and I don't. This was published in an academic journal. This should make sense. I'm clearly the problem. That's how they make you feel.
Yeah.
And then you read enough of it and you're like, wait, this article I just read about the same thing made a ton of sense. And this one didn't. And so actually, I think I'm not the problem. I think you're bad at writing. Yeah. Not you, Katie, but you, whoever this unnamed author is. But it takes, I think, a lot of time and immersion and experience and enough confidence in yourself to say like, oh, I'm not the problem here. There's difficult concepts and then there's just bad writing. And a lot of your academic career is just distinguishing between the two. And it's very stressful.
So my strategy, and this is quite a hot take, I would say, is do not read anything written before 1980. You don't actually need to read the classical texts. No one needs to read Foucault. What I did and what I really recommend others do is I read a bunch of introductory textbooks, basically.
Explaining all the original writers.
Explaining this kind of theoretical argumentation and like the authors. So it's so much more accessible. And then eventually I would rewatch the lectures, and it would make more sense on the second viewing after I had read outside reading explaining it. But I mean, I do feel like that shouldn't be necessary.
I think part of the problem is I feel like we're immersed in this other language, but we don't really acknowledge that it's another language. I mean, some people do. They just expect you to understand it. And then no one teaches you how to write it. I think some American universities do a slightly better job. Like, if you don't have a really nice high school that, like, teaches you about this kind of stuff, like, you're just kind of thrown into it and expected to understand and then expected to be able to write it yourself. And my theory about why there's so much bad writing is because people are just copying what they see. They're not, and that's how it becomes this kind of cultural language, is just people copying the authority figures who they think, oh, well, they have authority over me. They must be doing it right. They're highly respected academics. They must be doing it right. So I'm just going to copy how they write, because you write what you read. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to write in a particular genre, you read a lot of texts from that genre, and it gives you, like, if I've been reading a lot of Jane Austen, I can write an extremely convincing Jane Austen paragraph. Like, I can copy her syntax to the comma if I want to, you know? So, like, if you kind of copy what you've been reading, and it's so hard to break out of it once you're in it.
It's so hard to break the cycle.
Yes.
So I don't think there's an easy way out of it. I think that what we can do is make it more accessible and not treat it as a superior brand of English either. I think this is kind of a general issue I have with standardized testing in the United States as well, is that we have this version of English that we consider, you know, superior or quote unquote more correct. And I think academic English and academic jargon is really at the top tier of that. But honestly, it's very much a gatekeeping device, because learning how to speak academic English takes time, it takes resources. It's a way of keeping people at the top in the top. And I don't think we're going to change the system, and I don't think we want to necessarily get rid of it and make it so that future generations can't read it or can't engage with it as easily, but I do think we can make it more accessible. Make alternative ways of academic writing more accessible as well. I think a good movement that's going on within anthropology is co-authorship. So I think that's encouraging. I think that there needs to be a lot more of that. Also a lot more autoethnography.
So explain those two things.
Right. So co-authorship is when anthropologists write the paper directly with someone from the group that they're studying, the community that they're studying. And then autoethnography is when the anthropologist is writing about their own cultural background, which is also helping in the movement of it being less top-down.
Anthropologists, I think in particular, have this very lone adventurer kind of image where they've got this superior intellect to, like, these wild cultures that they're studying. And that's kind of how it gets constructed in, like, popular media and stuff. These days, that's not really how it is. You know, it's a lot of people.
It's not Indiana Jones.
It's not Indiana Jones. Anthropologists that I've read who have published in the last 10 years, people I'm meeting here, are very much researching something that's like that they're connected to. So it's becoming more of a thing that you, like, study yourself.
So I think that's a positive step forward. Also more anthropologists from the global south, which is good. But there's still a lot of work to do. And I think you can look at the composition of the faculty of our department and the leadership in our department. Yeah, could be a bit more diverse.
Yeah, another thing that's difficult when you're writing, like, in order to change the standards, it's hard to know how to change the system and, like, where you start. Because, like, what you're going to be reading in class, you know, it's down to the professors to, like, pick certain texts that maybe break the mold a little bit more. It's down to the journals and publications that publish these articles. Like, getting published in a journal is, like, an awful experience, according to every single person I've talked to. Except like the really small independent ones where it's like your friends. And we talked about that a bit actually in the This Is Your Brain on Birth Control episode where we talked about like medical journals. It's similar in softer sciences, but like the writing style, what they'll publish is very strict. And then also for students, like you want to pass your classes. So you want to write in a way that the professor is going to accept. I feel like so much of my experience as an academic writer is like seeing where I can push those boundaries and where I can't. I know that if I'm going to be doing something that's outside the norm, I have to write the best paper with the cleanest argument, and it's got to be so good that they're just like, okay, I'll let this slide. And so there's so many layers of like, it makes you get trapped in it. You know, you're like, I'm not going to be one of those people who uses all that academic jargon, blah, 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 and then you get caught up.
You get caught up in it, and I'll be reading my paper and I'll be kind of hating myself a little bit for it. It's fine. You do what you've got to do at the end of the day. Yeah, and I think that's also a bit of a difference, at least with the exam system here, is they really want you to kind of regurgitate information, which often means copying that style. Yeah.
Part of the system also is then how academic writing gets translated to the public, right? Mm-hmm. If you need proof that it's not English, that it's academic English, that it's like its own dialect in a way, you can't just hand a person on the street an academic paper and expect them to take something from it. Like there are people whose entire job it is, like journalists or like science communicators. You think about like Bill Nye or Neil deGrasse Tyson, or science journalism is like a field now. There are people whose entire job it is to translate academic jargon to everyday English. And how that happens can also be a real gatekeeper in terms of like access to knowledge that people have. So what are your feelings about that and how that's going at the moment?
Yeah, I would say it's not going great. Yeah, because it happens well so infrequently. Mm-hmm. I do think The Dawn of Everything is a great example, though, of it being translated well for a mainstream audience. I would love to see more anthropology writing in other forms in a more accessible way. You know, I would love to see more podcasts about anthropology.
Yeah.
I would love to see more YouTube video essays about anthropology. I would love to see more mainstream of news articles that incorporate anthropological perspectives.
Yeah, we rarely hear anything from anthropologists ever. I think that's why people think that anthropology isn't applicable or useful.
Yeah. Because
you so rarely hear from anthropologists. It doesn't seem like they do anything. Why is that?
Yeah.
Where are they? What are they doing? Are they just sitting alone in their corners thinking about things and not doing anything? Or
I think people are just so uninformed generally about what anthropologists even do and like what an anthropologist does. So I think that's the first step is, teach people. It's like there's no exposure in high school for students.
No.
So a lot of students, unless they're like in my position, having a family member in the field, more exposure to it. A lot of people just have no idea. And a lot of people stumble into it as a major at the undergraduate level. Yeah, I think it would be good if there was more exposure, if it was part of curriculum. Because I think a lot of people would benefit from introductory anthropology classes.
Yeah.
I think it would be massively beneficial. I feel like I personally have benefited. And in the years that I was working, even though I was not working as an anthropologist, but teaching English abroad, living abroad, I felt like it was so helpful. Yeah. Having that background in anthropology. Really, the most practical class I had at my university was Anthropology of Global Health, because that was about basically how a lot of health information is interpreted and shared by the WHO, how epidemics are socially constructed. Not socially constructed as in not real, but like how we understand them socially. And my assignment for that class, it was a group assignment, was rewriting the Wikipedia page on SARS.
Wow.
So a lot of really practical information came out of that class. Yeah, it was definitely one of the most impactful classes that I've had, and how to kind of interact with the world and understand the world.
That's the thing that feels so strange. Being able to think anthropologically and to have it as a practice where you see outside of yourself and outside of your own context feels so crucial. Like, it feels like the most important thing anyone could ever learn. You know what I mean? But like alongside like learning how to communicate, you know, whatever that is for you. Like being able to connect with other people like within a variety of contexts, right? That feels so essential. And if everyone could have some of that, because there's anthropology of everything now.
Yeah, literally anything you can think of.
There's an anthropology
I'm sure someone has written a book or an article about the anthropology of a particular topic.
I mean, we have like animals and houseplants now.
Yeah.
Facebook, phones, medicine.
Yeah. I wrote a paper about the anthropology, a book that I read about the anthropology of the BDSM community in San Francisco.
Amazing. So there's everything.
There's
everything you can think of.
there's a book about the matsutake mushroom.
Yes.
Anthropological study of a mushroom. It's so applicable to everything. And yet, no one knows about it.
Well, okay, but something you were saying earlier is that, like, anthropologists tend to take this kind of extreme stance of, like, we don't get involved.
Yeah.
And we just kind of let people do their thing. Like, they have access to all of this knowledge, and they just kind of keep it to themselves. Like, they'll publish a paper about it, they'll publish a book, but, like, they don't try to influence anything, really. There's like a separate field called applied anthropology for the people who think that you should do something, which is also, I don't know, some of it's kind of gross too. Like,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you try to get into applied anthropology, there can be a lot of controversy. There is this darker history with anthropology being a tool of colonialism, and more contemporary examples would be the United States government using anthropologists for things like the Pat Roberts Intelligence Scholars Program, using it as a form of intelligence gathering. I know that there's also cases of that being used in Latin America during United States government interference in political systems there. Anthropologists have been used as a tool for these state agendas. Really goes counter to what a lot of anthropologists believe. So I think any kind of attempts to get into political applications of anthropology can be met with a lot of resistance. And there is this philosophy of cultural relativism as well that can make it hard for anthropologists to utilize anthropology to write a self-help book in the way that other social scientists, other big name academics have been able to turn their research findings, if you want to call it that, into self-help books and build political philosophies around them. So I think that anthropology isn't really built for that. I think when you're taking on such a postmodern, post-structuralist approach, saying that all experiences, all truths are like equally valid in a way, then it's kind of hard to make stance.
But like, there is a way, like, if you're working with this group of people and they tell you, hey, there's this problem, the government is screwing us over, this and this is happening, we don't have access to you, these and these powers, but you do. Can you do something? And some anthropologists are like, no, you should not. And I don't know. So we've gone all over the place.
Yeah.
What are your sort of final thoughts? Like, what are you kind of doing in your own life? Like, where have you landed for your own personal feelings and your own academic career?
Okay, so in terms of academic writing, I'm still trying to figure out how to write to be accepted with my work, I suppose. So I would like to get good grades. And I do hope to apply to a PhD program. So that's something I need to be aware of. But again, I think personally in trying to engage with more recent authors, I think also if I'm ever in a position to teach about using more marginalized voices in anthropology that are in conversation with these more established writers. So looking more at responses to the more classic texts rather than just jumping into those classic texts. Because I think there's still a tendency to just cite the same 5 people over and over again and expose students to the same 5 people over and over again. So I think trying to make an active effort to diversify your reading, I think that will result in better and more mindful output. Yeah, I mean, I would love to eventually try to create something that makes anthropology more accessible. I have a habit of starting a lot of projects and not finishing them, so we'll see if anything ever actually happens with that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of space for more accessible writing. I think there's a lot of space for anthropology podcasts. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I feel like at the end of the day, like, I want the knowledge creation and the knowledge distribution to somehow be as accessible as possible. Like, I want to see what I can do, how do I in my own way, like, take whatever I learn and make it available to people. Maybe a happy medium, comprehensible, but also maintaining the style that's been handed down to us and the terminology and whatever. Because I think there is a happy medium in there somewhere. And I mean, part of me just wants to tear it all down. But, we do what we got to do.
We do what we can.
We do what we can. So, last thing, are there any anthropology texts, academic or not academic, that you would recommend to the general public?
Yeah, so 2 parts. One being straight up anthropology, Stuart Kirsch's Mining Capitalism. It looks intimidating from the cover at first, but it's actually very accessible in the way that it's written. He uses the case study of his own research as very much an activist anthropologist working with a group that was impacted by pollution from a mine in Papua New Guinea, and discusses how these international mining corporations are able to continue practices that are very exploitative, branching out not only from mining, but looking at how these same patterns are used by corporations in smoking and climate change related discourse. Yeah, I think he takes an admirable approach to the way that he works with the communities. Him writing this book and actively participating in the legal system as a way of paying them back for allowing him to come into the community and do his research. And he really centers the work that they do and their voices in the book as well. And then looking outside of that, personally, I am a big fan of science fiction. I think that if you enjoy science fiction and world building specifically, and speculative fiction, you will enjoy anthropology. And I would say that the work of Ursula K. Le Guin is highly influenced by anthropology. Her father was one of the famous kind of foundational American anthropologists. Yeah, her book, The Dispossessed, I think is a good example of integrating these very theoretical ideas about how we talk about the other, anthropological ways of viewing society. Yeah. Sadly, I think a lot of actual books in anthropology are not thrilling to read. Yeah.
That is an interesting thing to think about, that like maybe studying anthropology, like it might influence you in other ways and take other forms, and it might take the form of fiction, but it's like a way of thinking. It might be being applied in ways that are less obvious. Cool. Okay. We've already talked about The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Wengrow. If you want to read about like early human history from an anthropology perspective, very, very interesting. Then, of course, we have an episode on Watching the English by Kate Fox. Very, very different book, but very accessible, very useful, I think is the main key thing there. And then there's a book that I have a very big soft spot for that is not as accessible, but is very fascinating. The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh. That's the one where it's the anthropology of mushrooms, matsutake mushrooms. It's really fascinating. I have some critiques of the structure of the book, but it's one of the better anthropology books that I've read. So Yeah, I think those are the ones that I would say to start with, and we'll try and be better. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. This was very fun. I'm glad we got to air our grievances. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you would like to support us, you can rate, review, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. In the show notes, there will be links that link to bookshop.org, and we have an affiliate with Bookshop. So if you use the links in our show notes, we get a very small kickback percentage that helps us buy more books for this show. And then if you would like to become a member, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to get all kinds of behind the scenes stuff and just more of our thoughts and personal lives. And we do events and giveaways and stuff like that. So we would love to have you around. Yeah. Next time, you will hear from me and Victoria talking about actual piece of writing. But for now, this has been the Anthropologists signing off.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJV, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Fabland. Until next time, happy reading.